Sherry speaking. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining tonight's event here on Zoom. Thank you for your patience as we have dealt with all the technical issues. 2024, and we're still having this problem. You'd think after COVID, we would be at that next level of skill, but what can I say? Anyway, I digress. Many of you know who I am, but for those that don't, my name is Sherry Beaver. I will be facilitating tonight's Dev Stories, as I have done so for a number of years. And tonight, as usual, is a free event, and we are super excited to be talking about such an important topic that's absolutely close to my heart. And we are here to do so in a respectful manner. A little bit of housekeeping for tonight. Those who are joining and watching, please make sure you mute yourselves. And this is, of course, to support the two interpreters that will be facilitating communication for tonight's session. Not to mention, we have live captioners, so we need to support them as well. Now, you've seen in the chat is a link to the captions. That'll open up another browser screen, so you can split the screen or organize it any way you'd like. We'll have a 10 to 15-minute break a little bit later on in tonight's session. The interpreters can have a break, they can have a drink of water, make sure their voice is still functioning. And that way, all of you can do the same. Make a tea, go to the bathroom, make yourself comfortable and warm. Do you have a tea already? I hope so. We've got the live chat there, of course, but please make sure we're having respectful conversations in the chat. We're going to have two people that will be monitoring the comments and making any responses. I don't have 50 hands. I can't do it all, so I'm glad to have the two supports. So in terms of access, we do have two interpreters that are working tonight. We've got Alex and Beck. Alex will be voicing for me, and Beck will be signing for Rian. This is his sign name. And will introduce himself in Auslan to begin with, and then switch to English for the rest of the discussion. Great. So before we start, I, of course, want to do an acknowledgement of the lands that we are all meeting on tonight. For me, I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. They are the traditional custodians and have passed on those traditions for many, many generations. The Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation here in Nam. And Rian, what lands are you on?
My name is Rian, and I'm on Wiradjuri country tonight.
Thank you. Also, we do want to pay respects to the Indigenous and First Nations people out there and those who are joining us tonight, because this land was stolen, of course. Sovereignty was never ceded. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Rian Al-Natour. Please, up you come.
Oh, Sherry. Everybody, hello. My name is Dr. Rian Al-Natour. This is how you sign my sign name. I live in Bathurst. The sign for Bathurst is BX. Where is Bathurst? It's in 4 hours west of Sydney on the Wiradjuri lands. I'm a lecturer at a university, and I have moved into various locations. But I've lived here in Bathurst for the last 4 years. My family heritage, my family is from Palestine. My town in Palestine is Ramallah. And this is how you sign Ramallah. And tonight we'll learn a bit more about it. From now on, I will be speaking in English and Beck will be interpreting for me.
Thank you so much. So I met Rian a long time ago. It would have been in 2010, around then. And I was actually studying at university at the time over in Sydney. I mean, I don't like the university's new name now, but
Yeah.
I was there at the time. And the subject that I was studying was text and traditions. And at that time, I didn't actually know Auslan. And then we sort of reunited a little bit later on after he'd began his journey of learning Auslan, and it's fantastic. And tonight we're going to be talking about deaf people in Palestine. We're going to be talking about how the genocide has affected the deaf community. We're going to talk about the history and how we've gotten to where we are today with the situation in Palestine. So thank you for your introduction before. It's clear that your family, your history has strong ties to Palestine. And I've got a familial connection to those lands as well. And that's a big reason why this topic is so close to my heart, and I can empathise. I think it'd be good to start with a bit of the history of Palestine. Can you tell us what that is?
Absolutely. And I just want to highlight at the beginning that I am a hearing Palestinian, yes. And I just want to outline that my role isn't to speak on behalf of deaf Palestinians, but rather to speak about them, to raise their voices. Everything I say tonight about deaf Palestinians has been informed by Palestinians themselves who are living and currently surviving the genocide in the Gaza Strip. In terms of the history of Palestine, it is a beautiful history that unfortunately is plagued with a lot of colonization. The current genocide needs to be seen in the context of Palestinian history, a land that has always had a variety of different peoples, including Muslims, Jews, and Christians. So as an example, my own family is Orthodox Christian, but we are very, very Islamic culturally because the majority of Palestinian society is Islamic. And so when we look at us, we've never had always had and about okay, so I think Sherry has frozen.
So thank you for your patience. Jerry speaking. Can you see me now? Okay, great. I have switched to my phone data again. So I think I'm just going to leave it this time. Just be patient with it. So I'm very lucky. I've been watching the captions. Although my video froze and I was stuck, I have the captions here. So I'm great that we've got that level of access. So as you were just saying, you were talking about the state of Israel. And for those in the audience, what I'm going to sign tonight is this for Israel. This is the traditional Auslan sign. And the Auslan sign for Jewish is this one. This is the distinction. They are separate signs. So Leon was talking about the state of Israel and how it was established in 1948. And really, how did it get established, if you want to tell us?
Okay, so, and this is, of course, a Palestinian perspective. If you ask anyone who's a proponent of the state of Israel, they'll say a number of things. Apparently, it was an empty land and people from Europe and other parts of the world came and settled. Others will say that it was given to them by God, as if God is some sort of real estate agent. So what actually happened was that the British actually supported the Zionist movement. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to outline what Zionism is, because it's important to understand what is Zionism in relation to how the state of Israel was created. And I can see Beck has already sort of shown what the sign is for Zionism. And if you need me to explain that later on, I'm happy to, in terms of the Palestinian sign for Zionism. So Zionism is a philosophy. It's a political ideology that came about when nation states were formed. So the idea of statehood today is actually a modern phenomenon. It's not something that's always existed. You know, areas, landscapes, geographical locations have always existed, but the idea of nation states is a recent phenomenon. And so a number of Jewish people in Europe actually thought, well, why don't we join this idea of statehood by having a Jewish-only state? And that is Zionism. Zionism is a political ideology that seeks Jewish statehood. And so the Zionist movement thought to themselves, okay, where can we set up this Jewish state? And in its origins, it wasn't a state for all Jews. It was actually a state for only European Jews or white Jews. So they thought, maybe we'll set this up in Western Australia. Maybe we'll set this up in Argentina. Or maybe we'll set this up in Vietnam. Or maybe we'll set this up in Palestine. Now, Palestine has Jewish history, much the same way it has Christian history, much the same way it has Muslim history and other people.
All these other dorks on Twitter. Look, I bought a Tesla Model 2.
And just to let you all know,
well, you're fucking geeks!
someone's just
Fuck drives a Tesla.
someone's got
There's
a
no
mute.
man alive.
Someone by the name of
Fuck out.
Andrew.
I'll drag you from your Tesla in front of your bitch, and you won't do nothing. I'll get back in my Lamborghini, fucking fully spec.
Okay. Yep. Okay. I think he's been muted. If you can boot him out of the room, that's okay. So I'll keep going. Okay. So, where was I? Okay. So this was a state basically aimed for basically white Jews.
Ask me about the Tesla. Who's this dickhead? What do you think about the Roadster Tesla? What do you think about the Roadster Tesla? What do you think about the Roadster Tesla? Oh.
Okay, he's gone. Thanks. Sorry about that, everyone. Okay, so yeah, it was basically a state for white Jewish people. And so with the help of the British, they slowly came to Palestine before 1948. And then what ended up happening was that they realized that there were people there, my people, the Palestinians. And so what they did in 1948 is they began an ethnic cleansing campaign to force Palestinians to flee. And that's how the state of Israel was born. So a lot of people look at what's happening right now and they think to themselves, it's just two equal sides fighting. The story of Palestine is not two equal sides fighting. The story of Palestine is the same story that we see in Aotearoa, New Zealand, is what we see here in so-called Australia, is what we see in Turtle Island, and also Hawaii. It's a story of colonization. So with regards to the history of Palestine, and when we look at what's happening to the deaf community, we need to see that their oppression is linked to a colonial project that seeks statehood for only one group of people. So I hope that was summarized well. And again, apologies for the pauses. I didn't foresee the troll sort of entering the room just then. If the moderators can just keep an eye on the participants, and if you see someone with their microphone off, it means that they're trying to interfere. So just to let the deaf moderators know what's happening.
Jerry speaking. Sorry, I was just dealing with a few things there. Thank you, Liam, for talking about a bit of the history and talking about what's happened since 1948. Now, could you tell us a little bit about, from 1948 onwards, the Nakba that happened? What is that? What actually occurred? Why did it happen?
Okay. So the Nakba happened. So the Nakba in Arabic actually means the catastrophe. And in Palestinian Sign Language, there are two signs for Nakba, which I'm happy for Beck to show, or yeah. And when you look at the etymology of both signs, you notice that both emphasize trauma, catastrophe, because that's exactly what the event was. The event was basically a process whereby Jewish soldiers, with the help of the British, went from one village in Palestine to the other, massacring people, forcing them to leave to neighboring countries. And so every Palestinian that you will ever meet will have a Nakba story. The Nakba story is usually a story of trauma. And as Palestinians, we often say that the Nakba didn't just stop in 1948. It's in fact ongoing. It continues today. And you could even argue that the genocide happening right now in the Gaza Strip is a manifestation of the Nakba. It's basically it playing out at a time when now we now have electronics, we now have social media, where the whole world is now witnessing the Nakba. Whereas before, it was usually our parents and our grandparents that were watching the Nakba. So I'll give you an example in terms of how it impacted the people of Ramallah, which is, as you all know, my hometown. So there was a massacre of people in a neighborhood in Jerusalem called Deir Yassin. And so basically almost everyone within that village was massacred. And my family were basically warned and said, this is what's going to happen to you next. So a lot of them actually fled to Jordan, not because they wanted to, because they had to. And keep in mind as well, when the British left Palestine, it's not like they empowered us to look after ourselves and we had an army to take care of ourselves. We were a defenseless civilian population, and we actually remain that way today.
Incredible. Thank you so much. Does that mean that Palestine has never actually had its own government? It never had its own form of governance or any systems or structures of the like. So who actually has oversight over Palestine? Who makes the rules? Who makes the decisions for the people? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Up until the 90s, the state of Israel controlled basically every single Palestinian in some form. During the 90s, the state of Israel set up what it called the Palestinian Authority. So Israelis never like to use the word Palestine. They only use the term Palestinian Authority because they choose not to recognize our historical links as Indigenous people to the land of Palestine. And so with regards to this Palestinian Authority, though, it wasn't a huge geographical location. It was basically, you know, a small number of suburbs, including the Gaza Strip. So a small number of suburbs in what we call the West Bank, and which isn't much autonomy at all. So there was no army. There was just a little police force, or just a few opportunities to run our own education systems. Before that, though, we were not only forced to pay taxes to the State of Israel, but in response, we received oppression. We were incessantly bombed. We continue to be today, of course. We were denied the opportunity to learn about our histories through our own curriculum. So the story of the State of Israel for Palestinians is a story of racism, of genocide, and ongoing oppression.
Wow. Thank you again. Such great explanations. I'm just trying to imagine, I mean, what would it even feel like? I can't even begin to picture it. I mean, for the Palestinian people to have an opportunity to become self-determined, I mean, my heart's broken thinking about the situation there. It shows the significance of the lands that you're from, that Palestine and those people are so ingrained in their lands and their culture. And I'm just, yeah, it blows my mind thinking about the whole situation. People do have some confusion as to what is that? What is their relation or their role or their position within Palestine? Can you give us some insight on that?
Absolutely. So well before Hamas was born, like basically came into existence, the State of Israel was bombing and oppressing Palestinians. There was one political group that was advocating for Palestinian rights, and that political group was called the Palestinian Liberation Organization, short PLO. And in response to the PLO, because the PLO started collaborating with the State of Israel, another group was formed called Hamas. Before they were in power, though, the State of Israel actually supported them because they deemed the enemy to be the PLO. In elections in the early 2000s, because a lot of Palestinians were fed up with the PLO and the West installed a two-party system, as a result, it meant that Hamas was then elected into power. So that's basically how Hamas came about. So I also want to mention as well that the founders of Hamas were actually people that were orphaned by the State of Israel. So well before Hamas even existed, the State of Israel racially vilified Palestinians. The State of Israel bombed us. The State of Israel dispossessed us from our land. So this is not a war between Hamas and Israel. This is actually part of the ongoing Nakba, the colonial project that is the State of Israel. I mentioned before that the State of Israel was initially set up as a white Jewish state. I would argue the reason why Jews of color from around the world were accepted is because the Palestinian population was just so high that they needed the numbers. So it went from being a Jewish-only state to a Jewish majority state. And even today, when you look at the birth rate of Palestinians, the Gaza Strip actually had the highest. The vast majority of people in the Gaza Strip are children that did not elect Hamas, that are trying to live their lives. And that's the story that a lot of people don't realize. And with regards to the population of Palestine as well, I do want to mention that it has a higher portion of deaf peoples, which we can talk about later on. But that's also worth noting that the deaf experience of Zionism, which I'll explain later, is not only one of racism and colonization, it's also one of autism.
Wow. Again, thank you for your such succinct explanations on some of these topics and just now with Hamas. So, talking about October 7th, and that's when everything, I guess, started to become as catastrophic as it was until now. It's been 150 days or the like. It's been 6 months since October 7th. Really, when we think about catastrophes and genocides and of the like occurring around the world, we now live in a world on our screens and through social media, and we are seeing this in real time. We are seeing what is occurring within the Gaza Strip and what's happening to people. We are seeing how large the world really is and the immense migration of people, those who are there as well, that are forced to leave and forced to move around. And in such a tiny space of land as the Gaza Strip, there are 2 million people, all crowded and densely populated. Can you talk a little bit about the genocide and the effect that it's had on deaf people within Palestine and Gaza?
Okay, so I just want to give a bit of context about deaf people and their oppression. Because of the colonization process of Israel, and I'm talking about deaf Palestinians in Palestine, not deaf Palestinians outside of Palestine. So as far as I know, we cannot tell the amount. Well, I can't tell you, I can only give you an estimate of the amount of people, deaf people in Palestine, because there's no centralized body. Only recently has a Palestinian Sign Language dictionary been formed. And so when the State of Israel was created, it took the middle part, which I'll call 48 Palestine, and then it created what we call the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. The vast majority of deaf Palestinians are in the West Bank, and there are about 65,000 of them, which is quite a lot. Because, I mean, think about Palestine, right? It's 1/3 the size of Tasmania. And there are, in a really, really small place, about 85,000 deaf Palestinians all over historical Palestine. And think about, say, in so-called Australia, I think the estimates are something like, what, 30,000, 40,000? And look at how big Australia is, and look at how small Palestine is in comparison. And so within 48 Palestine, there are roughly about 5,000 estimated deaf Palestinians, and they live with Israeli citizenship. So these are the descendants of people who did not flee the 1948 Nakba. And in terms of their experience, which I'll briefly talk about, it's one in which experiences colonization in a different way. And I'll explain. So basically, deaf Palestinians with Israeli citizenship are forced to identify as Arab Israeli. They are not allowed to identify as deaf Palestinians. They are denied opportunities to learn Palestinian Sign Language. They are forced to learn Israeli Sign Language. In some cases where there is a community sign language, for example, Kufr Qasim Sign Language, or a Al Said Bedouin Sign Language, it is studied by Israeli linguists with a racist lens. So as an example, what the Israeli linguists will do is they will record the sign for Palestine as Palestinian Authority, or maybe the sign for Palestinian as Arab Israeli. So even the deaf community there experience Zionism in a different way that's specific to the deaf experience. In terms of the Gaza Strip, there are about 15,000 deaf and hard of hearing Palestinians. Deaf and hard of hearing Palestinians growing up in the Gaza Strip well before October 7th were oppressed. We're talking about a place whereby unemployment is at 60%. The lack of access to healthcare. Most deaf schools all over the West Bank and Gaza Strip are run by non-government organisations. Now, I want you to think about what that would be like in Australia if we had non-government organisations running deaf education. Like, what would be the level of education? Plus, so many opportunities whereby deaf Palestinians haven't been able to interact with each other, because in Palestine, deaf Palestinians are locked into one city or another. So as an example, myself in Ramallah, who happens to come from what we now call the West Bank, I can't even meet other Palestinians within other cities within the West Bank. So it means that deaf Palestinians are denied that opportunity. Deaf Palestinians from Ramallah can't meet deaf Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. Last January, when I attended the Deaf Games, which was an amazing session, an illustration of deaf culture where I met deaf people from all over the world and so-called Australia, it was a positive experience, and it's necessary for community building. Deaf Palestinians don't have that opportunity. Instead, they're locked away, which also means that the level of linguistic diversity within deaf Palestinian sign languages must be, I reckon it's a lot more than, say, the differences in dialects in Auslan. And so in terms of their experience, it is one in which is heavily influenced and shaped by Zionism, which is what I said before. It's an experience of autism and racism. So myself, as a hearing Palestinian, I experience Zionism as racism and colonization, whereas for deaf Palestinians, Zionism is magnified as an ableist, autistic project.
Thank you for that explanation and that experience of what deaf people are going through in Palestine. I mean, my heart just thinking about it, it's hard to begin even imagining how those people get through day to day, their determination. It's just incredible. Particularly with this profound lack of access that they are experiencing. I mean, do they have any idea as to what's going on outside of their immediate vicinity? Do they know the support they receive from around the world? I mean, how they get by every day is just incredible. Sorry, my brain is going at 1,000,000 miles an hour just thinking about it right now. I just need to look at my question list. I'm so sorry. It's just taking me offside by a minute.
That's more than okay.
Okay, right, on track. So when it comes to deaf people living in Palestine, can you speak to those who are sharing their experience on social media? Do you have any recommendations as to people we can look at and follow and support?
Absolutely. And what I will do is I'll share some. So 6 months ago, when the genocide started, I was privileged enough as a hearing person to be invited to a meeting, an online meeting, where a number of deaf Palestinians and their allies, other deaf people from around the world came together. And what we did was we agreed that if there were to be events, that we try and make them accessible. So I'll give you an example. Access Palestine was set up on Instagram to provide information about Palestine in a variety of sign languages. And most of the videos there are actually in ASL. And so what we're going to do right now is we'll probably post a couple of recommendations in the Instagram links. In terms of deaf Palestinians, I just want to say this quickly. So you know how the whole world has seen the emergence of journalists like Bisan, Mu'taz, Wa'el, Hind, and Bilestia, and they've become, like icons for Palestine, right? They've become just all these heroes that the whole world has watched. What I think is under-acknowledged is that the deaf world also has people like Bassem, people like Bilal, Allah, and others, deaf Palestinians who actually upload videos in Palestinian Sign Language or in international sign about the atrocities happening. And I forgot to mention Kamal as well. Kamal is also another one. So Kamal and Alat were probably some of the first people. So 6 months ago, and I just want to acknowledge the work of Wilk and also Jazz, who have been amazing allies, as well as Mazen, who lives in Nam and is a deaf Palestinian. I think it was about 6 months ago or 5 months ago, I had a conversation with Jazz and we were like, we've got to find deaf Palestinians in the Gaza Strip so we can follow them. And the Deaf Donations Gaza page was also set up because we wanted deaf people in Palestine to know that even though unfortunately deaf Zionists have not only let us down, but they've been part of the colonial project and been part of the oppression that deaf Palestinians face, outside of Palestine, there are lots of Palestinians that have deaf allies that make sure that we have interpreters at particular protests, that make sure that we have accessible information in different sign languages, or that videos in general are captioned, or that we have information sessions specifically for deaf people in terms of how they can show support. So fundraisers specifically for the deaf community in Gaza. So there are quite a few, but I want the world, I hope that the world starts to acknowledge that deaf Palestinians have operated in a similar capacity to Mottez, Bissan, and the others I mentioned before. You know, so yes, the hearing journalists have done a great job, but let's also pay some tribute to the deaf people that have, to the deaf community in Gaza that have taken on an enormous responsibility. Because when the state of Israel throws a bomb on a hospital or a church or a mosque, it doesn't ask the people within, are you deaf or hearing? There's no compassion there at all. It doesn't say to the Gaza population something like, we're going to make sure that this information about the upcoming bombing that we're going to do is accessible. You know, I also want to mention some distressing content, if that's okay. I'll just check with you, Cherie, about some of the experiences of deaf Palestinians, which have been, we've talked about the positive part in terms of the way deaf Palestinians have shown us that they are resilient, but I also want to use this space to also highlight some of the trauma that deaf Palestinians have faced, if that's okay.
Yeah, please. And I do want to make sure the audience is aware, those of you watching now, that this is a content warning for some pretty traumatic and distressing content about the things that deaf people are experiencing in Palestine. So I hope that all of you make sure that you are safe and you are looking after yourselves. Make sure you are in a safe space for this next segment. If you need to leave, please do what you have to do to look after yourselves. This is a safe space for all of you to watch and to listen and to learn, so that we can all strive to be better supporters of the people within Palestine, both deaf community and the broader community in Palestine. So thank you, Rian.
Thank you. And I also noticed a few people are either joining there, they haven't muted their microphones. So can the moderators just double check and see if someone else's microphone is unmuted? It might mean that we might have just some interference there. So I want to begin by talking about the story of a man named Ihab Tanbura. Ihab Tanbura is a deaf Palestinian who lives in Gaza. At the start of the genocide, a video emerged of the IOF soldiers who not only were torturing Ihab Tanbura, but they were filming their abuse of him. And I've seen the video as a hearing person with sound and without sound, and it is extremely distressing. And I will briefly describe what I saw. Now, the soldiers forced, basically they forced Ihab Tanbura to have his hands tied behind his back. They stripped him of his shirt, they threw him to the floor, and they were excessively kicking him. As one soldier filmed, and as he was crying out in pain, one soldier had his boot on Ihab's head. The other two, one was kicking him in the head. The other one was kicking him on his back and on his stomach. And they were laughing hysterically while he was being tortured. Now, for me, that doesn't tell me that the IDF were there to find Hamas and stop Hamas, because Ihab Tanbura and other deaf Palestinians are not Hamas. The other story I want to mention as well is the story of Atta Mugayyad, Atta Ibrahim Mugayyad, that's his full name. Now, Atta is a 73-year-old deaf Palestinian man who was at home. Video emerged of a soldier boasting about murdering this man. In this video, the IOF soldier was mocking his deafness. He was saying something along the lines of, yes, I saw the old man. He came out. He was basically waving his hand saying, no, 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 don't shoot, no, no, no. And then the soldier boasted and said, I shot him with 4 bullets. And his fellow soldiers were basically shaking his hand saying, good work, congratulations, good work. The other account I want to mention as well is the story of Muhammad Nahar. And basically the story of Muhammad Nahar is that he was actually murdered basically by IDF soldiers from afar. And he was surrounded by hearing people at the time and he couldn't sign. And I just want to please ask the moderator again, please make sure that people are muted because I can hear just some background noise, sorry. So in terms of Muhammad Nahar's story, so he was surrounded by hearing people, and when he was shot, he laid in the ground and it was almost like he knew he was going to die. And he was surrounded by hearing people who couldn't sign. And so he was thinking to himself, well, how can I let my family know that I've passed away? So he basically traced his name in the sand and then passed away, which is extremely sad. The video I mentioned before of the IDF soldiers murdering that the deaf Palestinian man, torturing Ihab Tambura, they're going to stay with me for a very long time. I also want to mention as well, when the WFD, the World Federation of the Deaf, decided to, how can I put this? When they decided to respond to the video of Ihab Tambura being tortured, I must say I was really disappointed with their response, because they basically said something along the lines of, we condemn forcing deaf people to have their hands behind their back because that renders them unable to communicate. And I sat back and I was thinking to myself, did you see the same video that I saw? Because I saw a man that was being tortured. Now, thankfully, as far as I know, because I've contacted deaf people in Gaza, I've asked about where is Ihab Tambura at the moment, and Ihab is fine. He's doing well. I also want to point out the unique experiences of deaf-blind Palestinians. We've probably seen on the news a lot about what happened at Al-Shifa Hospital, where several deaf Palestinians happen to be. There are 3 deaf-blind Palestinian brothers. One is excessively deaf and blind. The other 2 are completely deaf, but have a little bit of vision. All 3 of them were basically tortured at Shifa Hospital. So again, what I want to do is I want to again just acknowledge the experiences of deaf Palestinians that the world has yet to acknowledge. Again, can I please ask? Okay, yep, we've got someone on mute. Thank goodness. So and that's actually separate from the everyday experiences that deaf Palestinians face. So far, we might know that there are, as far as we know, there are about 16 Palestinians that have died, that we know. They've been murdered by the IOF. But we do have estimates of about 40 or 50 that might still be under the rubble that are unaccounted for. Just last week on social media, the deaf community in Gaza were looking for a man named Yahya who went missing. His mother has been bawling her eyes out in Gaza, waiting for her son to come home. The brothers I mentioned before, the deaf-blind brothers, at one stage, the community, we were afraid that they passed away, that they were murdered, because their home was attacked and their father was murdered and they were nowhere to be seen. I mean, it's one thing for deaf people to experience autism, but the experiences of deaf-blind Palestinians in Gaza right now who are being starved, tortured, denied access to basic interpreting services, power has been cut off. Aid has not been allowed in. I mean, what I've seen, as I've gotten to know deaf Palestinians over the past 6 months, I've watched them over time become skinnier and skinnier and skinnier. And It makes me, I'm sorry, I'm not going to make this about me, but I'll say this in passing. It makes me feel horribly guilty every time I drink, every time I shower, every time I access medical services, every time I, have some water. It's the guilt as a diaspora Palestinian who has hearing privilege. It's absolutely horrible, absolutely horrible.
Well, thank you for sharing those pretty horrific tales. Just trying to take that all on board and process some of those stories. Now, of course, we've just had some discussions that were very, very heavy and traumatic. So I think it's the perfect time to have a bit of a break for everyone. I hope the interpreters can have 15 minutes.
Ready for part 2.
Wonderful. Everyone ready to kick off again? Alex, are you ready? I can see Alex is talking up on Zoom. Wonderful. Must be working then. Hope that you all took a good opportunity to perhaps reflect a little bit, have some tea. I don't actually know if it's cold where you are. So whatever your favorite drink was, I hope you had it, whether it be tea, water, Coke. Hope we've all calmed down a little bit. But thank you everyone so much for watching so far. It's been such an incredible night so far. So we're going to crack on until 9 o'clock. That's good with you, Ryan? Yep. Wonderful. So I've received a fantastic question in the chat. Can you explain the difference between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism? What is the difference between these two concepts?
That's a really, really good question. So anti-Zionism is basically anti the political idea that there should be only one peoples between the river and the sea. Okay. Anti-Semitism, though, is discrimination against Jewish people. Are they the same thing? Nope, not at all. Not at all. So as I'll give you an example, I am able to critique England, the UK, without being called anti-Protestant. I should be able to critique the government of Ireland without being called anti-Catholic. I should be able to critique the government of Saudi Arabia without being called Islamophobic. I should be able to critique Russia without being called anti-Orthodox Christian. And I should be able to critique the state of Israel, because it is a state of Israel, without being accused of anti-Semitism. Because as someone myself who identifies as anti-Zionist, as someone who connects with anti-Zionist Jews frequently, I mean, one even made this flag right here, which I'm really proud to have on my Palestinian scarf, called the kafiyah, was actually given to me this week by a Jewish person who invited me to their anti-Zionism Passover. So it is in the interests of Zionists, deaf and hearing, to claim that any criticism of the state of Israel is anti-Semitic. It is not. I freely criticize governments. I freely criticize political parties and groups, including Hamas, including the Palestinian Authority. There is no one immune from my criticism, basically. I criticize the Australian government frequently. I think they can do better in terms of deaf education. I'm sure that's something in terms of NDIS funding. That doesn't mean I'm anti-white Australian. It's a very, very ludicrous accusation that we as Palestinians have to deal with.
Incredible description of those two concepts. It's so important that we just keep in mind the difference between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. And it's really important that we maintain that distinction, the distinction between state and church. Beck, you okay? Yep, oh good. Coughing fit, it always happens at the wrong time, doesn't it? But yeah, as I was saying, it's so important to acknowledge the distinction between church and state. In saying that, significance of having that distinction, can you talk more to that point? Why is it important to have that distinction?
Okay. So can I answer that and talk about what I mean by free Palestine, like the expression free Palestine?
By all means.
So as Palestinians, at our protests, we often have some slogans that have become very, very familiar. Quick example.
From the river to the sea. Free Palestine. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
So when I think about a free Palestine as an example, it's one in which I, as a Palestinian, have the same rights as the people colonizing Palestine at the moment. I have the same rights as Jewish people, that we set up one state where we're all free. But for me as a Palestinian, it's not only about being free from colonization and Zionism, but it's also being free from other forms of oppression. In my view as a Palestinian, a free Palestine is one which has gender equality, queer liberation, is free from autism and has disability and deaf justice, where deaf Palestinians are supported to their full potential, where they have the right to access and value different Palestinian sign languages, where they're able to crisscross the borders that have been imposed upon us, where they can access education, housing, employment, just like the rest of us. I am talking a lot, I'm giving a lot of deaf examples because of our audience and the topic today. But yeah, that's what I mean in terms of in terms of a way forward, in terms of a liberation process.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that explanation. Again, it's so important that the people of Palestine can be free, can be liberated, and have that self-determination. So, I do want to ask the audience if there are any members that have got some questions for Jan, please pop them into the chat. I'll have a read and I'll make sure I sign them for the audience so that they can be responded to. Now, we'll be here until 9 o'clock, and unfortunately, I do have to make it a pretty hard finish as I have to leave at 9. I mean, I wish we could have this conversation for many, many more hours. So with deaf people in Palestine, how can we support them? Is it about going to rallies? Is it about sharing information? What other ways can we support deaf Palestinian people?
Okay, so some deaf Palestinians that I've contacted, they're able to read Arabic. Some are a minority are able to read in English. Some can't do either, but they're seeing the rallies. Okay, so if you can, go along to a rally. There's usually rallies in Naarm that have interpreters, in Gadigal, or what we now call Sydney, in different capital cities, or if not, organise them. The other thing to do is to fundraise. So what I'll do is I'll get the moderators to post the deaf donations page and a link to a fundraiser for deaf people in the north of Gaza. Right now, people in the north of Gaza, deaf people, are starving. Deaf babies don't have nappies. Coders, Palestinian coders, are taking on extreme responsibilities. We can talk about, if we've got time, we'll talk about Palestinian coders. Palestinians with Israeli citizenship are being silenced. They're being forced to stay indoors. They're unable to embrace publicly or speak out about Gaza or embrace their Palestinian identity. So fundraise if you can, attend rallies, share because deaf Palestinians are saying that. Follow deaf Palestinians on Instagram that happen to be in Gaza or even in the West Bank. Listen to our stories. But also, and this is the part that I have no pleasure in saying, but I have to say it, it's important. Unfortunately, deaf Zionists have let us down. So, and I'm talking about, when I say deaf Zionists, I mean deaf Zionists who are in the state of Israel, who participate in the army, throwing bombs against deaf Palestinians, but also some in Turtle Island, or what we now call America, who have created videos in ASL, as an example, denying that there's a genocide going on, calling all Palestinians things like terrorists, saying things like, there's no one innocent in Gaza. And this is the unfortunate part as well. Deaf Palestinians in Gaza, while they're dodging bombs from the IOF, on their Instagram accounts, they are receiving troll messages and hate messages from deaf Israelis. This is the unfortunate part. There should be solidarity with deaf people all over the world, some shared experience. But unfortunately, that doesn't exist in Palestine, because you cannot be for disability justice or deaf social justice and at the same time support a genocide happening right now. So let's just make sure that we attend rallies, uplift the voices of deaf Palestinians from all over Palestine, and fundraise, please, because right now, before October 7th, deaf Palestinians were struggling. Only 5% of deaf Palestinians in Gaza have a cochlear implant, because the community there can't afford it. Most of them have hearing aids. Most of them have been denied access to an education. The ENT specialists and services specifically for deaf people are minimal, because they're through non-government donations. They were bad before, and now they're even worse. So now the lives of deaf Palestinians has been focused on the everyday. And what I haven't been able to explore at the moment is the trauma that deaf Palestinians have accrued throughout this process. The trauma, I mean, all of us watching as witnesses to this genocide happening, we've all been traumatized. A lot of us have been changed. Imagine what's going on in the experiences of deaf people in Gaza. I just want to read something out quickly, because I went around and asked deaf Palestinians a month ago. I told them that I was going to be speaking to you about their experiences, and I asked them, what they wanted me to say. And there were a mixture of responses. In some cases, they couldn't understand, so I had to try and sign a video. And they got back, they usually sent back a video or a blurb saying something along the lines of, we're suffering here, we're starving, we're homeless, we're living in tents. In some cases, someone would show me a video of themselves with no shoes, or shoes with holes in them. Their bed was basically the dirt. All they were living on for a week was a box of tomatoes or a box of vegetables. That was all. In some cases, deaf people would show me themselves. They'd say hi, and they'd say, I'll just demonstrate something like,
Suffer, suffer, suffer. Israel is bombing us. We are running away. We have no house.
And so it wasn't easy for me to sort of navigate and watch those myself, but there's one message that I got translated from Arabic into English, and I'll just read this out if that's okay quickly. Deaf community in Gaza suffers a lot. They don't have any basic necessities. They don't have the resources to leave. Please sympathize and support them, because they feel not seen and not heard. So please, if I can just ask everyone, fundraise for them, donate if you can, raise their voices, have these conversations in communities, and please encourage deaf people to attend rallies, and even, support, deaf Palestinians in Palestine and the diaspora.
Well, thank you so much for that. I do have one question, or actually a couple of questions to go through. I'm going to ask my question before I forget it, then I'll go to the chat, because in my typical fashion. I'll forget it if I don't ask it now. So when it comes to Palestine and the videos and the media that we're seeing coming out of Gaza and the evidence as to what's actually occurring there, and you've got the Israeli government saying, oh, we're going after Hamas and we're doing this, that, and the other, and there's no evidence, and they're just manipulating the media. They're skewing the story and they're trying to make everything go their own way. So could you describe why it is the Israel government and people are acting in this manner? Why is it when we see the facts and see the truth, they're still denying it? How do we make sure we're getting accurate information about what they're doing and what's happening in Gaza?
Okay. So when I was 15 years old, I lived in Palestine, and there was no social media then. Yes, I'm very old. There was no social media then. And I remember that the Israelis would check our mail. So if we sent mail outside of Palestine, usually like they'd open it up and they'd delete some parts. They'd restrict the media. This was well before social media. In some cases, we'd received letters that were opened. So there's always been an effort to try and silence Palestinians. I mean, look what happened earlier, where a troll came and just started playing interference randomly before they were booted. And so what now the Zionist movement is struggling with is that the world is now, they are now eyewitnesses to the crimes that they are committing against the Palestinian people. And in the age of social media now, I actually don't believe anything that the Israeli government or Zionists actually share. So even the only large Gaza deaf school run by a group called Atfaluna, and Atfaluna in Arabic means our children. Not only was it basically bombed excessively, I think we all saw the images, but the Israeli soldiers took a picture of themselves in front of it with their guns as if they were proud. And it makes me wonder, well, what did those deaf children do to you? And in response, a bunch of deaf Zionists said, yeah,
Disgusting.
Absolutely.
Disgusting.
And it's like, well, what did they do to you? But a lot of deaf Zionists started to troll deaf Palestinians to say, well, this deaf person that died was Hamas. This person that died was Hamas. I think we all now see through the reality. I mean, we're all witnessing what's happening ourselves. So what I would do is I'd go straight to the source. I would not wait for the mainstream media has let us down. Western governments have let us down. I think it's time to just go straight to the voices of deaf Palestinians. Go to their Instagram feeds, go to their social media posts, and be the eyewitnesses to the horror that they're witnessing.
Yeah, thank you again. As always, very articulate, very well said. I know time is quickly running out before our eyes, but we have 2 questions left. So I'm hoping you can summarize. I will summarize those for you. I'm just looking for them. There's just been so much chat, so much chatter. There's 2 questions, but I'm going to start off with the second one. So the phrase, from the river to the sea, what does that actually mean?
So as a Palestinian, when I use the phrase from the river to the sea, I'm describing the geography of Palestine, because Palestine is located from the river to the sea. A lot of Zionists claim to be indigenous, and I find it hard that you can be indigenous but also colonize at the same time. What hearing and deaf Israeli Zionists will never have is a connection to the land that myself, Mazen, Ahmed, and other Palestinians here in so-called Australia have. So as an example, Mazen himself, he's from a city called Haifa, which is on the coast of Palestine. I'm from the city of Ramallah, which is inland. When I talk about going back to Palestine, both these cities are located from the river to the sea, in between that terrain. When I talk about going back to Palestine, I'm not talking about going back to Haifa, because that's Mazen's city. That's not my city. I'd love to visit him, and he's more than welcome to visit me. But it's about me returning to Ramallah. So when every Palestinian talks about their homeland, they're talking about a specific village. So a lot of Palestinians are not from Gaza. As a matter of fact, about 70% of the population in Gaza, including deaf Palestinians, their ancestries are from a different part of Palestine. This terrain is from the river to the sea. So it's basically a description of the location of Palestine.
Yeah, beautiful. Thanks so much. It's so important for the Palestinian people to have the capacity to go back to their land, to their home, where their sense of belonging comes from. Now, the last question from the audience. Can you describe some Palestinian signs for Zionism? And just any other common signs that could be used for Israel, and what are some of the localized signs?
Okay, now that's an interesting question, because I am a hearing Palestinian, and I do want deaf Palestinians to show their own language. Is it okay? Sorry, I know Beck's in the role of the interpreter. Yeah, I think I just need to confirm with her what my role is, whether I can show or maybe get someone else to make a video later on. What do you think, Beck? Sorry to put you on the spot.
As the interpreter who's been supporting Ryan through this, I think that you have a role to show what deaf Palestinians have shown you and note that there's variation. And I'll go back into the interpreter role now.
Sorry, I know that's a very unusual request in your role, but yeah, we do. Sorry, and I should have outlined that I'm so fortunate to have Beck as a mentor and a guide, and to take on a Palestinian whose peoples are going through a genocide right now is next level. So I'm not wearing a hat, but my hat off to you, Beck. Much respect. Okay, so this scarf right here, there's many sort of signs, but one sign that I know for kafiyya is kufiyya. Or from men that wears it on their head. Okay, you know, in terms of the sign for Zionism, so I'll just basically explain.
The reason they sign this sign for Zionism is because people who are not Jewish are seen by Zionists to be not worthy of vision, not worthy of support, and they only support those people who have the same political agenda as them. So that's why that sign Zionism, meaning only seeing with one eye. And so we want to erase the idea of Zionism.
Make sense?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that explanation. We've got 5 minutes left until we have to end things for tonight. Now, did you want to make any closing comments, final statements, just before we wrap up? Perhaps an important message for the audience.
Please keep learning about the experiences of deaf Palestinians. Please realize that, like all societies, every society, unfortunately, around the earth, every hearing society around the earth has autism and ableism. Deaf Palestinians not only have to deal with that, but they have to deal with colonization as a very autistic process. Please get in touch with deaf Palestinians, follow them, fundraise for them, because they are desperate. And hopefully in a free Palestine, it can be a place where we not only revive a strong deaf Palestinian culture, but it's a place where deaf people from all over the world and hearing people can come and visit and see us live in freedom. So please keep in touch, and, you know, just remember, from the river to the sea.
From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this discussion. I know that there are so many of us who have got many questions, but I think you and I can have a bit of a chat later and perhaps create some video content just responding to some of the questions we've received. It's so important that we are having this discussion and that this discussion continues and just never stops, particularly for our deaf community here in Australia and around the world. It's important that the deaf people in Palestine know that they have support globally. If the audience does have any questions, please send them to me through my Instagram, Facebook. If you've got my mobile number, just shoot them my way. And I'm going to work with Rian to make sure that we are developing some resources and answers to all of your questions. Thank you again to all of you for watching tonight. Thank you to Rian for giving up your valuable time to have this important discussion about your knowledge, your expertise, and your relationship to Palestine. Thank you.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
We're so
Thank
fortunate.
you so much for having me here tonight.
We're so fortunate to have this discussion. Thank you to Beck and Alex for doing a fantastic job of interpreting tonight.
I agree, they've done a great job.
And I want to say a big thank you to other people. We've got Jess and Kartik who have been moderating in the background. They've been moderating our chat this evening and they've done an incredible job. So a big thank you to the both of them. And we're going to make sure, and they have made sure, that this space has remained safe for everyone. And I want to thank our captioning team as well. They've done an excellent job of the captions tonight. And it means that we have got access for as many people as possible. This video has been recorded and it will become available in a few days' time. I do need to do some editing and cut off just some of the fat from the start, but yeah, it's going to be a bit of a job piecing it all together, and I'll make sure that this video is available within the next week. And then, of course, I'm going to disseminate it far and wide. As I said, if you've got any questions, please send them through to me and we'll make sure that we send out some video resources when we have the answers. If you've got any feedback about tonight's session, any ideas for future deaf stories, please get in touch with me. So again, thank you everyone in the audience for your support. It's much appreciated. And have a good night.
Good night, everybody. Thanks for attending.